We are going live. Hi, Asim. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hi, Grace. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so to start the show, I would love the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So obviously, maybe I will start with your hobby, which is coffee drinking. But one of the things that I thought were like really fun or like really interesting to hear was like, you when you first enter the U.S. or like entering the entering your campus, you were kind of you went to a career affair and like you got a job right away because of like or like you got people to approach you to get your resume and then you don't even have an ID and you had to ask your um school like professors to print out your resume and later on when you're at Microsoft like you have worked in various different industries from engineering to marketing to sales and you have like a really over like really well-rounded kind of like career experiences. So those are some things that I thought were really interesting. Maybe we could start with like, how do you grow up and then what were some core lessons that you've took early on in your life that kind of impacted you to become like a driven person and navigating the career changes in the US?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to think about, growth and where did you grow up? I grew up in a city called Mumbai, with
Mhm,
I want to say like millions of my neighbors, right? It's a very dense city,
mhm,
and I had friends from all walks of life. And I mean, I had friends whose parents were multimillionaires. I had friends whose parents were
mhm,
not so well off. I had friends who were great at sport, who were great at academics, and it's just the fact that you get exposed to a lot. And the other thing that's important also is that there is a lot of competition, whether
mhm,
you like it or not. Like you compete every day. You compete when you're playing sport in the playground, you compete when you're in school, you compete when you're in extracurricular activities.
mhm,
And then there's also this thing called hustle. It's called the grind, and that actually helps you develop a lot of grit. And looking back now, you've sort of connected the dots and said, okay, you grew up in a very fun yet challenging and
mhm,
fast-paced environment that kind of shaped who you are. So I don't think
mhm,
that anybody plans it when you grow up in terms of what experiences you have. But I
mhm,
think that's one of the things that when you look back, you're like, oh, I was glad I had that experience. The second thing I would say is, and I have this discussion with my wife all the time. Uh, I am not a master of one. I kind of have been exposed to a whole lot of things, and if you now parlay that to my career, I started off as an engineering manager, wrote code, was a PM, then did go to market, then did sales, then was COO of the Azure business, ran operations and worked on financial models and then new businesses, and then went to the VC world, and now I'm
mhm,
running product. So it's all been a diverse set of experiences, and that sort of theme of wanting to learn different disciplines, wanting to do different things, has stuck with me ever since I was little. And I never excelled in one thing, but I
mhm,
wanted to collect experiences, and the thing I didn't know about is what excited me the most. So that's kind of a
mhm.
common theme if you want to parlay it that way.
For sure. I wonder, so like, how do you identify what's your unfair advantage?
It's a very interesting question. I've thought about it a lot. I think I would say it's a competitive advantage. I wouldn't say it's an unfair
Mhm,
advantage. I think the competitive advantage, or the thing I look forward to most, is learning new skills. And in general, I'm not afraid of wanting to go deep into an area, learn more about it, be naive, be a kid, like, learn about shiny new
mhm,
toys, and understand new pieces of technology. And that's kind of the theme that everybody in tech is now sort of embracing, right? There was,
mhm,
when I started my career, there was client server, and there was a Windows model, and then
mhm,
came Office, and then was Web 2.0, and then there was this thing called mobile phones, and they came around, and then there was cloud computing, and now it's AI. uh, who knows what's next? And
mhm,
so I think if you think of a career in technology, or for that matter any walk of life, there's always change. And I think as long as you're comfortable with change, and as long as you're comfortable with learning, and being a fifth grader and learning from the start,
mhm.
I think that's sort of what I look forward to, and that's what attracts me the most. And if I were to say, hey, one thing that keeps me afloat, keeps me energized, it is that.
Mhm. I wonder, so like I really like what you said about like be curious and like constantly learning, going deep into like a certain areas. I wonder when you're thinking about like having a career at Microsoft, like now you're obviously very successful. You're like a VP at Microsoft, and then before that you were a partner at Madrona. And how like who is on your personal board of advisors that like you're seeking help with or like like bouncing off ideas with whenever when it comes to like having like a career decision that you have to make?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and I look at it as my rather than my personal board of advisors, I look at it as my shareholders. I
Mhm,
think I've been fortunate to be exposed to a lot of people through
mhm,
my career who are just amazing at what they do.
mhm,
I have been exposed to folks who are CEOs, who are VPs, who are directors, and
mhm,
even some early in career folks on my team, because they have a lot to teach you as well. And the thing that I think you've got to get comfortable with is calling upon the right set of people for
mhm,
whatever they are great at and whatever they are known for. And so,
mhm,
if I have a question around, let's say I'm taking a job in sales,
mhm,
like who is the best salesperson I know? I'm going to go talk to them, and I'm going to seek their advice. Who's the best CMO I know? If I'm
mhm,
for a job in marketing, like who's the best marketer? Or if I'm faced with a growth challenge, like who do I know who has scaled industries and have very close friends in the VC world, and they're
mhm,
amazing because they see a lot of patterns. And so I couldn't identify one, but I do think that they truly say that it takes a village to sort of nurture a child, and I think it's taken a village to sort of help me in my career.
mhm,
And so that's the nugget of information that I wanted to share, and it's also the beauty of having different perspectives, because no one person has seen it all. No one person can guide you in certain streams, but I think extracting or talking to them about the right nugget of information that you want is super critical.
mm. I wonder, I really agree with you on like, maybe you're seeking help from different categories whenever you need like a specific expert that you could pull from your network. And I wonder how do you identify what is like the right skill to gain in each step of the way? Just because right now maybe we could start with like, being the VP of Microsoft, like maybe we could start with like what's your day-to-day like, and then what do you identify as like the core skill that you're constantly trying to improve nowadays?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, it's a broad question, but let me kind of take a nugget out of that
Mm,
and try and scope the discussion. As somebody who's building product, I think your job goes beyond just building something and
mhm,
giving it to sales and saying, "Oh, good luck." Like, I hope this sells, right? I think that's just the wrong way to go about it.
mhm,
I do think that when you are running a business, when you're running a P&L, one of the things you've got to identify is the left to right of what can get you successful, and that, yeah, it starts with product, and it starts with identifying the core gaps from customers, but it also finishes all the way at customer success.
mhm,
So while people all have their skills and their swim lanes, I do think that you've got to look at the entire spectrum. I think one piece of advice that I would have is, I think you really have to start looking outside in from, hey, what do customers want? Like, why what
mhm,
what do they do today to solve the problem? How does this make their life like 10x easier? And it can't
mhm,
be incremental. I think it's got to be massively easier from what they're doing today. Or
mhm,
if you're creating something in a new category, what is the hair on fire problem? Like one of my VC friends talks about, and he says, look, what's the
mhm,
hair on fire problem? What are people excited about that you're building, so that they have their wallet on the table and say, okay, tell me how much I'm willing to buy now. So I think that's some of the things that I look for. I think from a skills perspective, as you're growing in the world of product, as you're growing in the world of business, you also want to look for easier repeatable patterns. Like,
mhm,
how do you get the flywheel established? When I was at Madrona, our founder Tom Alberg wrote an amazing book called Flywheel Effect.
mhm,
And so one of the things is, like, how do you generate the flywheel? How do you have customers demanding for more? How do you then feed that back into the product? How do you create ecosystems? And how do you always think about scale? There's also a risk where you think about scale too early before getting product market fit. I think a lot of
mhm,
people have talked about it in depth, but that's one thing I continuously think about is, like, do we really have product market fit, or are we still in the nascent stages of discovery and learning and iterating and getting that to the point where it's flying off the shelf.
Mhm.
And while you should be thinking of scale, you don't want to be overthinking of scale because it's a little bit of cart before the horse.
Mm.
So
I really like.
coming back to your question on skills, uh, I think there is no substitute for being curious. I think there's no substitute for, this continuous mode of like, okay, I solved the first problem. What's the next one?
Mhm.
And then the only other thing that I would say is you can get hung up in the minutiae of things.
Mhm.
You've got to be able to stack rank very clearly which are
Mhm.
the biggest problems that can have the biggest ROI, and how does that become the first one that you solve, and then go on to the next one, and then go on to the next one.
Mm. I like that, but how do you identify what is like the biggest problem slash like the biggest ROI at a situation?
Yeah, I've been noodling about this over this weekend, especially since you're raising it now. But as leaders, I think there's one core job, right? The core job is to make high quality decisions
Mhm.
and to make very few very high quality decisions. And so you really have got to think of, like, you've got finite set of resources, you've got a finite set of folks on the team, you've got finite set of hours that everybody has. What's the biggest bang for the buck? Like, you've got to be able to quantify and sometimes qualitatively assess which problem you need to go solve first, right? And people talk about it all the time. They're like, look, do I want to add a new customer? Do I want to keep my existing customer? And those are trade-offs
Mhm.
that you have to make. Uh, I have clear frameworks sometimes that I always think of in terms of like, hey, what is the framework in any given situation that I want to apply?
Mhm.
Is it a quality problem? Is it a security problem? We always talk about, hey, security first. If you don't do
Mhm.
security and if you don't build secure products, your reputation is at risk. And it takes a lot to earn a reputation, and it takes, a minute to sort of lose it and to lose credibility.
Mhm.
In my mind, like, just to give you an example, like, security first, you've got to go build secure products. Like, you can't prioritize features over security, but that's just my point of view.
Mhm.
Somebody else in their line of business might have a slightly different take on it in terms of like, how do they think about, is it a massive security hole? Then yeah, you got to do it first. If it's something that you can live with for now, but you have to come back to it a little later, and you're prioritizing quality for customers, okay, it's a fair prioritization. So you really have to think about that moment in time. You really have to think about that framework, and then
Mhm.
go approach that framework, and then help prioritize. And there's no one framework that trumps everything, because context and the situation matters.
100%. I really like what you said about like, having context in different situations and then like um prioritize things, and then as a leader you have to make like a few decisions, but those supposed to be like really important ones. Quickly say ahead of the audience, hi Crispin. So I wonder, when it comes to like your day-to-day now at Microsoft, like maybe can you give us a like sneak peek of like what's like your day-to-day like at Microsoft, and then when it comes to AI, like everybody have their own takes. Obviously, like this year it's gonna be the year of AI agents. But I wanna learn more about like what's your thought process on like evaluating the importantness in the AI categories. Like what are things that are on your radar that maybe people are not familiar with?
Yeah, one of the things I continuously think about is the application of AI.
Mhm.
And, yes, there is infrastructure being built, there's
Mhm.
models being trained. I think the big question you've got to ask yourself is, how does this make life 100 times better? We're
Mhm.
already seeing applications in early spaces around like productivity. We're seeing applications in spaces around, sales intelligence. We are seeing applications around, marketing scenarios. I think the big question to me is that I think about already is, how does this make research and development go faster? If you
Mhm.
think of it, one of the big challenges we face as humanity is it takes a lot to sort of bring new products, and I'm not talking about only software products, but it takes a lot to bring new products to life. Think about new materials, think
Mhm.
about new silicon design or chips, think about new drugs in the pharma space, think about topical creams, think about handbags for that matter. We're all doing a lot of discovery in these hard spaces. And if you're lucky, like, just to give you an example, if you're in the pharmaceutical industry, you spend a lot of years on researching a drug. And if you're lucky, in 7 to 10 years, and in with a few $1 billion, you'll probably bring a drug to life. But if you're
Mhm.
not, then you go back to the drawing board and start again. And that's a lot of, human capital, human intelligence, resources, time. There's a lot of inefficiency in that system. And we've just evolved that system in increments. So the thing that we're thinking about is like, how do you think about accelerating science? How do you think about accelerating R&D? Like, how can you apply AI on the computational side in magical ways to sort of go and build these new products, or innovate and build and really offer up that innovation category transformation. So that's some of the problems that I'm thinking about, in terms of like, how can we have AI apply and turn the corner in these innovation spaces to sort of create things that are better, faster, cheaper, at a much more higher quality.
Mm. I like what you said about like, how is AI applied into people's day-to-day life, especially in accelerating science R&D and on the computational side and like new product that are innovative. So I wonder when you're thinking about accelerating science and the R&D side, what does that kind of intel for you? And since you are very big on angel investing as well, you're a great angel investor, maybe we could just like talk about what are some trends that you're seeing in this space and from the founders in the space that are trying to apply AI into science R&D or other sectors.
Yeah, yeah. So my angel investing has primarily been pretty broad. Like, I don't think it's limited to the scientific field, or the R&D field. But the simple philosophy of my angel investing is like, is it a category that I'm excited about? Is it a category that I think is going to go transform in ways where
Mhm.
taking out efficiency from the system? Is it a hair on fryer problem that we talked about? And the most important one for me is like, if I'm angel investing, what value can I add? Like, is it
Mhm.
something that I'm uniquely qualified for? Or I talk about the investor fit. Like, am,
Mhm.
am I the right angel investor for you? Can I help you in ways that will help you go much faster?
Mhm.
And can I share the pitfalls that I've had in building businesses? Can I learn with you in certain senses? Can I be a devil's advocate? I was just talking to another founder CEO over the weekend, and one of the things that we were laughing about is he said that, Asim, when I come to you, you're always devil's advocate. You always start with no first. And I really have to convince you. And as I'm convincing you, I am learning that all these questions that get uncovered, and we sort of go back to the basics. We go back to thinking about the what and the why, and what changes, and we had a hearty laugh about it. But that is really the essence of how you're pushing each other to say, okay, convince me why this is the right thing to do. Like, are there five other things that we have not thought about jointly?
Mhm.
And it's all these fun interactions when you're building a business. And so it's a pretty simple angel investing philosophy that I have, is like, be excited about the category, love the founder or the founding team, be able to add value, and maybe just get to a point where you can actually help them scale. And a lot of these are moonshots,
Mhm.
and sometimes they fail, and businesses also take risks, and there's a certain amount of risk associated with it. So
Mhm.
the question really is like, are you able to have a checkbox on all of these categories for me in my head to then say, okay, great, then I'd be the right angel investor for you?
Mm. What would you say are things that you enjoy advising founders on? Is it like product or would it be distribution since you're executive at one of the biggest company ever? And how do you think about the value add that you typically bring to founders and what are kind of founders that you're looking for? Are they like, the product leaders at big companies that doing a spin-off or like are you looking for, let's call it like recent grads from like the top PhD programs in the country? What are things that excites you?
Yeah, yeah. There's a few things that excite me from a category perspective, I would say. And let's just actually not even call it category. Let's just call it patterns, right?
Mhm.
I'm more interested in trying to figure out like, how can I help someone with think about scaled distribution, think about go to market. I think that's point
Mhm.
number one. I worked in sales for a lot of time. We grew the Azure business, and
Mhm.
Microsoft trains you to sort of have a very partner centric approach, right? Like we're a partner friendly company, and you always think about like scale, like how can you get to that points of massive unlock.
Mhm.
uh, and when I think of scale, I'm not only talking about go to market or distribution scale, but I'm also thinking about product scale.
Mhm.
So i'm sort of different in that way, because I tend to look at it as every aspect of the business. Like, I'd love to sit down with founders and say, okay, great, what is your uh, what does your intended next year look like? Let's get very
Mhm.
focused on what is the next milestone that you're trying to hit, what are roadblocks, why are you trying to hit that milestone. But
Mhm.
also fast forward in 5 to 7 years, like what does success look like? And if you look at your value chain as you think about building products, like where is the friction point today? What are you gated on?
Mhm.
So we'll talk about their pro formas, we'll talk about their scale strategy, we'll talk about product, we'll talk about quality, we'll talk about scenarios. And so I tend to look at it as everything connected left to right. I think if someone's looking for, hey, I really need a person who only advises me on an architecture, and you don't sort of you're looking for more of a CTO advisor. You're not looking for breadth advisor. And so
Mhm.
I think that's sort of the difference that I keep in my mind on, is this person looking for a specialist, or is this person looking for a generalist? I
Mhm.
didn't put myself in the generalist category.
I feel like, go to market is something that like basically every single company needs. Um so sorry. Today my cough is like unstoppable. It's crazy. So I wonder, so like when it comes to like building Azure back in time, like, you were the CEO of Azure, and like I feel like it was one of the fastest growing Microsoft product that's like on the balance sheet. It's like definitely one of the most important one. And like, when like the cloud war was like not war, but like cloud space is like very competitive in general. How do you kind of establish Microsoft's like position right when you walk into the door as the COO? And how do you think about like the unique things that only Microsoft can do versus like, the rest of the giants?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think when you are in the moment, I think you are sort of, I would say, learning from your competitors.
Mhm.
You're also learning your own differentiation,
Mhm.
and you're learning to figure out, like, hey, what do customers want, more importantly. One of the patterns that was clear to us is sort of having this enterprise grade offering, right? Microsoft
Mhm.
has always been an enterprise led company, and it's also been a partner led company. And so one of the big pieces of unlock for us was, while building a product, was also thinking about how do we get it to a point where enterprises trust you on the data side of things, on the security side of things, on the trust side of things. Like, what are
Mhm.
kind of the certifications that you need to have? How do you think about connecting different data silos? Like, you're not saying that, hey, I'm just your infrastructure provider, but do you have PaaS services? Are you building applications on top? Customers don't only want to buy cloud, like they want to
Mhm.
buy a full suite of IT solutions. They want to start with cloud, they want to have PaaS services, then they want to graduate to productivity,
Mhm.
including things like getting things like Office. And so you really have to think about the entire stack. That was one lesson we learned very quickly.
Mhm.
The other one that I talked about is, how do you scale through partners, right? I mean, if you're going into a company that's, let's say, an oil and gas company with a cloud offering, yeah, I mean, cloud's great, it's infrastructure,
Mhm.
but customers also want finished solutions. And who are the ISVs that would want to go build solutions on top of the cloud, and who would be our partners in that particular segment? And so thinking about the big unlock,
Mhm.
you also come down to, like, who are the partners that are established in that industry? What are their needs? Like, how can we help them be successful? In which case, we are then making our customers happy and delighted, and therefore your cloud platform, along with their solutions, becomes a very attractive proposition for customers. So those are just kind of the smaller things that we uncovered and we learned, but I think they just had massive impact.
For sure. I wonder when it comes to like selling the entire stack, how do you think about collaborating with other teams internally at Microsoft? And you also mentioned about like scaling through partnerships. How do you identify like what are the right partners for you? Because I feel like in tech, obviously, I feel like whenever we think about um like the different type of partnerships, like a lot of the companies could also be just starting doing like something similar, or like let's say like they were your ecosystem partner, but later on they decided to do a same product as offering as you. So like how do you think about who is a right partner, and then how do you kind of like structure a partnership that's effective for both party, and having the metrics to showcase the CEO or like the C level the results, and then what is like a good results like on the revenue end, like how do you compare it to like other stuff that you could be doing or the
Yeah.
opportunity cost.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered your question as you asked it, but you gave it away a little bit.
Mhm.
But here's my take on it, right? I think you've got to look at it. If you are the customer, what do you really want to do? Like you want to look at a good platform. You want to have the data to sort of go with it. Then you've got to have the high level application to sort of go manage that data. And ultimately, it's about like 4 or 5 core scenarios that are looking to address as a customer. So I think the first thing to do is to put yourself in the customer's shoes and say, what does a customer want? If I was a customer, what do I want? Go talk to
Mhm.
them, go learn from them, and go understand what processes do they follow to do the 4 or 5 things that they need to do today. You then
Mhm.
back it up by saying, okay, now these are the 4 scenarios that they want. Now let's start putting in the puzzle pieces together and say, okay, which platform do they want? What are the ISVs that are offering solutions? And therefore, is this completing their picture or not? And in every scenario, you'll probably have 2 or 3 ways of completing that scenario. And that really becomes your blueprint for how your ecosystem looks or how does your stack look. And then you start saying, okay, great. Like now, if I go, if these are the set of partners that you want to work with, what assets are they bringing to the table? What is unique about them? What's the core USP? Then you look at yourself and you say, okay, good, great. What's your USP? What are the partners good at? What are you good at? What are you
Mhm.
not good at? What are your partners not good at? And so I think then you sort of look at your company plus them. Like, how does that complete the picture for the customer? And how is that the best in class solution then compared to what's out there? There's always going to be somebody who's competing in that space, but what makes you truly unique? What makes you best in class? And then
Mhm.
there is this question that keeps coming up on like, is there a competitive mode? Like, is there a way you think about like how does your solution differentiate in the shorter term, in the longer term? Where is it going to go? And therefore coming out of that is going to be some thinking around like, what's the business model? How do customers pay today? Do they do a per seat license? Do they do consumption pricing? Do they do subscriptions? And then kind of trying to think about, if that is then the way they do business today, are you attaching to it, or are you transforming it? And so these are just some simple questions that would help you get to the bit of like, how does the ecosystem shape up, and therefore who do you partner with, who do you compete with, or
Mhm.
sometimes who do you have competition with, which
Mhm.
is which is not uncommon in our industry.
For sure. I wonder back in time when you were not the VPs yet, let's say early on in your career as a, head of product or engineering manager, how do you leverage your time to like both accomplish some sort of like really time consuming detailed task versus like, moving yourself forward in the ladder that like, becoming a leader. So basically the question is like, there's so many people working in big tech. They're trying to step on to the next level. How do you think about like, take on what type of project or like being at what kind of team that to help you accelerate your growth, but also at the same time manage to do your job right? Because every single day there's like the day-to-day lines of code that you have to write or the sales quota you have to actually meet. But on the other hand, you also want to manage a team. You want to like improve your growth.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think a lot of us, including myself, like grapple along with it today, right? There's a day to day, and then there is the leapfrog moment, right?
Mhm.
How do you sort of get to that? I think you have to, sort of really understand your space,
Mhm.
and I say it out of all humility, but do the grunt work first, because
Mhm.
when you do the grunt work, you identify the points in the system that are broken or that have a lot of friction. Back in Azure, like we were grappling with, one of these reporting mechanisms that we have, and it was just taking a lot of time, and it was time consuming. And
Mhm.
we used to live our lives in spreadsheets and look at data, and it was hard to pull data. And one of the things that one of the leads on my team questioned is, and she said, look, why are we doing this again? And this is where growth comes from, right? We are
Mhm.
thinking about net new ways of doing it. And it's a very simple example, but she basically spent 6 hours and went and created a tool. And that's
Mhm.
a very simple example of how you are making your life easier, because now you're not debating where is the data coming from, what is the source. So I think that's one example of how you think about the next step function. And the way to think about it is, can you put yourself out of a job and build some repeatable automations, technologies, scale mechanisms, etc. The other way to think about it is, you sort of take the perspective of, if I have to go create 20% more time, what are the activities that I want to stop doing that are low level activities, but those are some things that we can make repeatable, or some things that you can drive automation for, or in today's world use AI for. How can you give those tasks to an agent, let's just call it an agent, and
Mhm.
have the agent sort of do that work for you, and you are focusing your time on the high level tasks, on high level decision making. And that is how you keep moving the ball forward, and you keep moving humanity forward, right?
Mhm.
The most brilliant thing I think I ever learned was, you just have to disappear for a while, and figure out like
Mhm.
how it gets done. And it's a funny story, because I had, our daughter, our second daughter, was born when we were when we were thick in building Azure, and I
Mhm.
was gone on like a parental leave of some kind. And when I came back, my team had found like new magical ways of doing things, and you're basically filling in those gaps. And so then you think about it, and you joke and like, oh, I should take more sabbaticals, because we get more, better, faster, cheaper, because people
Mhm.
step up, you build tools, and you keep moving the ball forward. And again, it's a funny example, but I
Mhm.
think if you take that principle, and you lay down that principle in mind, and say, look, every year we're going to get 30% efficient. Great. What are the things that we shouldn't be doing but still have to get done, that we can then automate? And what are the things that we will stop doing, because those things don't are not worthwhile, or they're big time suck, or we need
Mhm.
to focus once and get it done. The other thing that I also learned is, I think you've got to be very principles driven, and you got to write these principles down. Because
Mhm.
most of the time, when you're in large meetings and when you're in small meetings, we tend to talk about the same things in different ways, in different share with different shared data, different shared metrics, different shared points of view. I think the way to sort of break deadlocks sometimes is to say, okay, what is the principle? And I think when you write down the principle, it becomes very clear, and your decisions just flow. And as long as you have alignment of principles, it's easier to go solve the problem. But sometimes you might not be aligned on principles, and that's where you want to go spend the time. Uh,
Mhm.
I'll give you an example. We're trying to think of approaching in a couple of industries. Let's say, like,
Mhm.
let's say we want to be like, hey, do I want to build in this industry? Do I want to build in this industry? Do I want to build in this industry? Great. That's a problem statement. Can do it all. What is the
Mhm.
principle? How are you going to pick? Are you going to pick because it's a large market? Are you going to pick because it's an underserved need? Are you going to pick because
Mhm.
it's more money to be made? Are you going to pick because it's a long-term play where without short-term revenue? Are you going to pick because it's inefficient? And then if you go right down the principle, and you say, look, the principle is that we want to play in a large market, we want to be highly profitable, and we want to solve an unmet need. Like, great. If those are three principles, how do you weight them? And then
Mhm.
you apply that framework to three industries, and you say, okay, great, now we weighted it. Now how do we pick? So I think as long as you're aligned on principles, because some product manager might be thinking revenue first, the other product manager might be thinking size of market but not immediate revenue. So as long as you write stuff down, it just makes decision making fairly simple. And that's
Mhm.
that's I think the beauty of taking a principled approach, as I call it.
I 100%. I like what you said about taking a principle approach, like writing stuff down so that like you have like a basically like a cohesive benchmark for every decision you make instead of just like being over the place. I wonder when you're thinking about building out your own team, how do you find the I guess like undervalued talent just because I feel like in the market of today, like obviously there is like the fast growing AI company trying to absorb all the talent. And then even for big tech, of course, like I feel like from like a monetary wise, like a big tech obviously have like the most amount of advantages. But on the other hand, to attract the right talent, money is just one thing. How do you think about like um ensembling effective team? And how do you think about like from managing the talents, like how do you filter out like, who is actually contributing the most, or like are they actually getting their job done? Um, I constantly see like, nowadays like the Gen Z working environments, like everybody's documenting everything, taking screenshot of every Slack messages they send. So but like is it like really the right approach to like stand out in front of your boss, in this case maybe you, like people trying to standing in front of you to like presenting their work? What's the most effective way for you to measure if the person actually does the stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk all day about effective teams, and let's sort of break it down into two parts. One is sort of how do you hire, and I think the way I think about it is again sort of the take the principled approach to hiring, right? Like you want to be able to hire people who are incredibly smart and smarter than you. Just to be fair, like I do want to hire people who are extremely smart on the team, and
Mhm.
who think outside the box. Because look, what is it, if you go back to the fundamental nature of the team, in
Mhm.
my opinion, and this comes from my time in sport, right?
Mhm.
A team's got to look, no two people on the team, in my opinion, should look the same. I
Mhm.
think you want to hire a team that is most effective and that makes use of diversity and have different skills come to light. Like I want to hire people. I mean, look, I'm not the best at product design. I will confess to that.
Mhm.
I want to hire the world's best designer. I want
Mhm.
to hire somebody who has a very strong design experience and who
Mhm.
has design perspective and thinks design first. I want to hire a super solid architect on the team who thinks about product architecture first. And I want to hire someone who is extremely good at taking I want to say the outside in view and being the voice of the customer. I mean, all of us of course have to be close to the customer, but I want to hire someone who truly deeply understands the domain, let's just say,
Mhm.
and he or she should be world class at that.
Mhm.
So I think that's principle number one, is to say, look, let's hire a team of amazing folks who have varied talents, because that's how we are going to sort of go push the envelope on creating
Mhm.
something that is world class.
Mhm.
The second thing is, I also want to hire people who are incredibly curious, who are incredibly hungry, who are incredibly, inquisitive about why is it done this way? Like, how can we break barriers? Like, do we need to think about a different approach? Who are not afraid of making mistakes. I think, one of the things, at least we get hung up on in big and small companies, is, do I need permission to go to this? I learned this from a boss I worked for, and
Mhm.
have deep respect for. He basically said, "Look, common sense about everything else. If you on the team are doing something that makes common sense, why would I stop you? I think that means it just makes sense. We're humans. Like we're not going to go do the most critical things
Mhm.
in the ways in which it makes common sense. So that should be a principle of the team. And so I think that's the other thing that I look for, is like, how would a person behave in an environment, in a situation where they put common sense about everything else. And then finally, I think there's a lot to be said about cultural fit, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that I pride the teams I've built on is, like, I don't want any egos. Like I don't want know-it-all attitudes. And I think it's tough if you walk in saying, "Hey, I know everything, and therefore you should listen to me," versus, okay, let's figure this out together. I think collaboration is super critical, and especially in this
Mhm.
world of distributed teams,
Mhm.
collaborating is super critical. And so, we're not trying to hire supervisors, we're trying to
Mhm.
hire leaders or teammates. So those
Mhm.
are some principles on what we look for when it comes to building a team. And then the only other thing, but one of the most important ones, is you want to have fun. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, you might be in a room, you might be discussing things at length, but there's no reason why you can't do it with a smile on your face. There's
Mhm.
no reason why you can look at the problem together, being on the same side of the table versus being
Mhm.
against each other. So those are some tenets on team hiring.
For sure. I really like what you said about like, are they like, do they have the basic like foundation beyond the foundation um skill set that they have to have? You want to hire like the world class talent of an X category, as well as like, being like a culture fit, as well as like, how they're handling themselves in like a group or like team situation. And I wonder when it comes to like, I want to go back to maybe talking about like investing in the AI space. Like, since you were an investor at Madrona and then now you're an angel investor while working as a VP of Microsoft, what would you say would be the biggest differences between investing at a fund versus angel investing? And how do you think about like portfolio construction as an angel investor? Would you write the same check, or like would you try to acquire any type of ownership for the companies, or would it be more towards like just like regular angel investing, since compared to investing at a fund, you have to think about certain things that you probably don't have to as an angel?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's pretty simple, right? Like if you think of it in terms of a framework, if you're investing out of a fund, you got to really think about, you know, a few things. One is portfolio construction, like you talked about, like what's the mix of what are the spaces that I'm investing in.
Mhm.
Two is how many of my investments are risky versus non-risky. I mean, yes, there's always risk, but how many of them are managed risk versus non-managed risk? You often have to think about your stage of investment. Like, is it a Series A? Is it a Series B? Especially if you're a multi-stage investment firm, which Madrona was.
Mhm.
At the A stage, you go all the way up to C. How many early? How many late? You have to be very mindful about follow-on investments. Like, how
Mhm.
am I managing my dollars from a follow-on standpoint? And then honestly, like, do I have the depth in category in
Mhm.
order to sort of help and create sort of value for my CEOs or my founding teams? And so those are some of the things that you need to think about as a fund manager, for lack of a better term. As an
Mhm.
angel investor, you don't really think about follow-on investments. You can,
Mhm.
but you don't really think about that.
Mhm.
You don't really think about portfolio construction, although you don't want to invest in the same type of company and same type of
Mhm.
category just to de-risk your investment.
Mhm.
The more important thing that I think about is the investor fit. Like, am I the right angel investor for the
Mhm.
founding team? Can I help them? Is it a category that I'm excited about? And frankly, have some depth in.
Mhm.
And I think as an angel, I try to keep it simple.
Mhm.
Generally I would say in the first couple of meetings, I have a good sense of like, hey, is this a fit or is this not a fit?
Mhm.
And then I also, love to see how the founding teams think,
Mhm.
and what is their motivation. Is their motivation to build something brilliant and great and big, and is it a 7 to 10 year journey, or do they want to do something which they potentially could think of as an exit in the next 3 to 5 years? And no approach is the right one. I mean, I think for founders,
Mhm.
both are fine. Like, some look at it from a, hey, how do I build something, sell it or get acquired, and then move on to the next one. And then there are serial entrepreneurs, and there's nothing wrong about that. Also, I think geographically, if you're at a large fund, you have to think about, like, do I want to invest cross geographies? As an angel, I think you have the liberty of like not worrying too much about geographical presence, as long as you're okay with the taxation, tax that comes with
Mhm.
it, and all that kind of stuff. So I think I tend to keep it pretty simple.
For sure. How do you think about, when it comes to like diligencing the company as an angel? Like, would you say like business side comes first, or like the product side come first, or like the technology come first? Um,
I think, to me, people come first.
of
uh,
course.
because I think in a world where we're all figuring it out, like, I want to be able to work with the team, and so
Mhm.
to me, I think it's team first,
Mhm.
and then I think all these factors come play and have a role to sort of play. And again, different weights depends on the category. If it's a proven category, then it's less about the category, more about the product, more
Mhm.
about the go to market.
Mhm.
And again, like I said, context matters in these
Mhm.
things. I don't think that there's like a one playbook that applies to everything, but in my experience, I think people first. Like, that to me is a non-negotiable, right? I want to be working with great teams, and that have great attitudes, frankly.
Mhm. For sure. How are you thinking about sourcing the best founders? Wouldn't they come from like a company like Microsoft? I wouldn't say Microsoft itself, but like let's say like they're coming from like a big tech, they're working on the most crucial call it AI project or data projects, or where would you see the most amount of success coming from? Are they from like a workplace or school, or how do you source like the people, and then what are the quality of the people that you're looking for
Yeah.
your investment?
Yeah, I think being in VC has its advantages, and so as I was at Madrona, like I think the ecosystem in Seattle is super vibrant, and
Mhm,
so I'm not actively sourcing, I'm not actively
mhm,
going and seeking companies. I teach at the UW, I'm on a few company boards, and I think it organically, I come across quite a bit of a mix of founders, and I think
mhm,
no one place I would say founders come from. They come from big tech, they come from
mhm,
academia, they come from non-traditional aspects of like, hey, I've worked in, let's just say, I mean, 6 months ago, I met someone who was,
mhm,
who was working on automobiles in a car dealership,
mhm,
and she had an idea. I'm like, wow, like that's amazing. Like, so it's a very
mhm,
non-traditional way of, meeting founders, and even there's a lot of repeat founders, and I shouldn't say repeat founders, but there's a lot of folks who work in startups and who've seen the journey from a close angle as employees, but
mhm,
now they want to go to their own.
mhm,
So net net, I think a lot of varied sort of sources, I would say. But yeah, I mean, I'm not actively sourcing. Being in a venture firm, in my past life, like I do miss that part. Like I was seeing 5 companies every day, and I
mhm.
don't see that anymore. But that was more from the evaluating for the fund perspective. But that was also an aspect of VC that was incredibly fun.
I saw that you're investor of Cornerstone Ventures, which is like India's frontier enterprise SaaS fund. What are some interesting trends that you're seeing from India in the SaaS space?
Yeah, it's so funny. You're seeing two things. One is, and this is what I observe. You're
Mhm,
seeing a lot of business models that have worked in the West
mhm,
getting
mhm,
applied to the East,
mhm,
but three more zeros.
mm.
Because now you have like a wide audience base or a
Yeah,
customer base. So
yeah.
you're seeing that,
Mhm,
which is, hey, business model here is getting applied there.
mhm,
Uh, but you're also seeing a lot of contextual
mhm,
businesses being built. Like, if you think of let's just think of like family owned businesses or small
mhm,
businesses, right? Like India has, I don't know, like the last thing I thought, like 600,000 something, like small
mhm,
business was the last number I saw. There are smaller stores and retail outlets in any given state or something like that. And you compare that to the West, you just don't have that many. And so there's a real consumer trend that's driving that economy, and then there's a really enterprise trend that's driving the Western economy. So I think there's a difference also in, like, what are different economies known for. Like, the US is primarily a B2B market in terms of, like, that's what most startup founders go towards and want to build more B2B businesses. In India, it's more B2C, and it's more consumer businesses first.
mhm,
And then there's like scale first, right? You can't
mhm,
build a business in India without thinking about scale.
mhm,
And so you get, because you're always thinking about large populations of people.
mhm,
Those margins could be different, right? Because now
mhm,
you've had like an n of you know a billion people, versus here
mhm,
you have like an n of 300 million people. So I think
mhm,
there is always that differences from a scale standpoint.
mhm,
The other thing that I would say is also the kind of I would say career profiles are very different, right?
mhm,
I mean, yes, you see a lot of young founders here too, but if you go to India, like, it's predominantly like very youngish population, and the startup culture in India is fairly newish, I would say, compared to
mhm,
Silicon Valley, right? I mean, I
mhm,
think back in the day, like when I graduated, you could either become a doctor, an engineer, or
mhm,
a lawyer, and that's it. Like, and that was the profession.
mhm,
But now I think people start to think about like enterprise, like, building a business first, and that's so amazing because it's just a new way of thinking from an economy that is growing at rapid speed. And,
mhm,
and again, that's an example of how geographies are different and what
mhm,
lessons we're learning.
mhm,
I think the other thing to also notice is, as you think about companies being built in India, they want a lot of GTM advisory, uh, versus here. I think there's generally proven systems around GTM and PLG and all these ways of like acquiring customers. That is slightly different. That's what the founders are looking for most. They're they're,
mhm,
they're looking they're less oriented on teach me how to build, but they're more oriented on teach me how to build a business, not a product.
100%. I see something similar in China while I was like working in investing in China. And I wonder, would you say India will have like a super app, or do you see not coming?
There's a lot of debate on, like, is it a super app, is it not a super app? I think it's goes back to the same old question of, like, hey, do you have one stack or do you have many stacks?
Mhm.
Our partner at Madonna used to say this. He said, look, if you think about, the world, like, you can always have, and if you compare it to, let's say a bar, right? You're going to have different spirits in the bar. The
Mhm.
beauty is going to be, like, who makes the best cocktail, right? What's
Mhm.
the right mix in terms of
Mhm.
technology? And I always think that, look, if you think of regulated industries, you could have one stack. Like, you could have, let's say a government saying that, look, here's a preferred stack.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
then with things like open source, all these model developments, etc., you could look at it as, hey, there's a combination. And for enterprises, there might be more openness. For government, there's less so. For regulated industries, even less so. I'm not sure if I have a very strong perspective about the fact that there will be a super app,
Mhm.
but I do think that there is going to be multiple stacks if you think about it that way.
I really like that way of thinking. I want to be mindful of the time, so I want to end with a 1 minute fire round for you. So, first question is, Taylor, to you. What's your favorite coffee? What are you drinking right now?
Oh, right now I'm drinking just an espresso with a splash of almond milk.
Oh, wow,
My,
that's
when I was
trendy.
an intern, my first coffee, like the first thing I latched onto would be this whole milk, latte with
Mhm.
6 pumps of honey, and it was very sweet. And now, as I've aged, I've realized that my preferences have changed.
Oh, wow, you're Americanized now. I feel like this is very Gen Z, by the way. A splash of oat milk, but that's crazy. It's not for almond milk. But anyway, so what's your favorite book? So you said this about like a biography before on another podcast, but wonder
Yeah.
if there's new like rival books coming up.
Yeah, no, I think Andre Agassi's Open continues to be my favorite book.
Mhm.
It is definitely up there in terms of lessons learned. And I'm a sports buff.
Mhm.
I don't read as much as I used to, but biographies have always been my favorite category.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I wish I could name one, but there isn't one. I think, like I said, I think I look at it as, all, like, the people I've worked with at Microsoft outside in the
Mhm.
Seattle ecosystem. I think there's just too many to count.
Mm,
It's just incredibly hard. But I will say that a lot of my learning, a lot of how I operate, like a lot of my principles are emulating my dad. Like, I think he's just been fantastic as somebody to look up to and grow every single day.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Oh, that's a tough one. Uh, would I invite to a dinner party? I tend to gravitate towards smaller audiences and smaller teams. I think it would be the Indian cricket team.
Oh, wow, not love that. Who where can we find you outside of work?
I'm sorry,
Where can we find you outside of work?
at a coffee shop. No
Amazing,
brainer. No brainer.
amazing. Is that Starbucks or no? Since you're in Seattle.
I'm not picky. I love a good coffee. I mean, sometimes it's Starbucks, sometimes it's not. I do like local mom and pop shops. I do like to try a lot of different coffees, and so it's a mix. But it'll most likely be at a coffee shop.
Amazing. Well, Asim, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know we're at time and super appreciate you. Such a fun conversation.
Grace, thank you so much for having me. I loved it, and good luck with bringing in on amazing guests. I'm an ardent fan as well, and I've seen a lot of the podcasts you host. So thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Shout out to Dip in the audience. Okay, let me quickly ending stream.